probably most of you know, we're a kind of a thriving city and region at the moment, and we know that it's, you know, the current state of things won't last forever, but we're a city of booms from the mid-19th century when gold was discovered to recovering from the earthquake. We of course had our dot-com boom, and we're in another one now, and there's been many others in between. We've never had significant busts, though, at least not ones that sustain. So while we don't think the current trajectory of what's happening now is going to last forever, we're pretty confident that the general trend will continue, and more people are going to want to live here, more people are going to want to visit here, more people are going to want to work here, and that's what we're seeing. So there's a lot in the region and in the city that we think position us well to, I guess, to absorb and accommodate that growth, and the transportation infrastructure is a really big and necessary part of it. We are a big tourist center, we are a big job center, we have a very much, I'd say, an environmental ethic as a city and a region, which really plays right into where we started this morning with what Rob was talking about. Here in the city, although we are very densely populated, we have half of our trips happening on transit, on bikes, on foot, in taxis. Even here, we have about 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions come from the transportation sector. And they're not coming from our transit system for the most part. We're about 1 percentage point of that, because more than half of our transit fleet is electric, between the rails and the electric buses. And the balance of our fleet is a very green, renewable diesel electric hybrid fleet. We have one of the greenest taxi fleets in the nation. So we're doing what we can here locally, but the shift is important in terms of getting folks out of their cars, giving them good alternatives, because it is, we don't have a lot of industry here in the city, so the transportation is a big part of what's generating our greenhouse gas emissions. So when we think about the city and the region and the state, we definitely see the connectivity. At the state level, the state of California adopted a framework for greenhouse gas emission reduction. And from that, they've required the regions to develop what they call sustainable community strategies, which are really combined land use and transportation plans. And anybody who knows anything about planning or land use or transportation knows that they're very much integrally linked. Yet, at least here in California, we've essentially never really planned for them together. We've generally done them separately. You heard Jim made a little bit of reference to it. Land use planning here, like in most of the country, is very localized, and generally the transportation planning has just been to follow the organic land use planning that has happened city by city, and that's why we have the sprawl that we have here in California and the rest of the country. This new state framework is trying to really fundamentally change that by forcing that land use and transportation planning to happen together, and forcing us to think about how we can more sustainably accommodate growth and development that we know is going to come. People are coming. You saw on Rod's chart the population projections for California. We have the same thing playing on the ground here. So in order to make that happen, we need ways to connect people. We need transportation systems that are connect where people are living, where people are working, where people are visiting. So that manifests at the regional level here in the Bay Area, and then we need to provide the urban network for that last mile so that we can connect to people's homes and people's jobs into those regional hubs. My agency provides transit service and regulates taxi service here in San Francisco, so we have a lot of the pieces of the surface transportation system in place, and there's a lot of investments that we're making in those to try to make them better choices for more people, for more trips. But we operate and live in a region where people work in one city, live in another city, where they live somewhere on the peninsula and they come into San Francisco or San Jose or Oakland for cultural or educational activities. So we can't think of transportation just within any one municipality's boundaries, because that's not how people live their lives. So you saw Rod gave the statewide numbers here in the Bay Area region. We're expected to grow by 2 million people. So that's like adding 2 more San Jose's to the Bay Area, with a lot of housing growth that's anticipated and a lot of job growth. That's going to happen whether we plan for it or not. What Plan Bay Area, which is our region's sustainable community strategy, is saying is, given that growth is going to come to our region, people want to be here, let's plan for it. Let's be smart about how we're planning for it. Let's think about where that growth is going to happen, and let's think about what transportation infrastructure we're going to need to support that growth. So basically what the plan says is that the bigger cities that already have some level of transportation infrastructure are where most of the growth should happen. So that's a good thing. Our challenge is to actually build the infrastructure to be able to support that growth. So now zooming down to the city level, we're looking, right now we're a city of about 835,000 people. We'll be up over 1 million by 2040. And it's both new residents, but also new jobs. And this was a projection that was made a couple of years ago. And we're already, as you can see, 40% of the housing projections for the next, at that time, 25 years are already in the pipeline. So these aren't fanciful numbers. A lot of this stuff is being entitled, a lot of this stuff is being built. And if you look at where the growth is, kind of like at the regional level, we need to concentrate in the cities. In the cities, we need to concentrate where the infrastructure is the densest. And you can see that's happening. This northeast section of the city is where the growth is concentrated. And that this tallest bar here is where the future terminus of California high-speed rail is. So the fact is there's more people living and working and visiting here than there ever have been before. And while we may see some correction based on what happens in the national or international economy, generally believe that this trend is going to continue. People want to be here. That's a great thing. But it does pose some challenges that we're trying to address, and we see California high-speed rail as being a big part of that solution. So looking at the region and in terms of transportation, this is a map from Plan Bay Area. So the red is where you can see the concentration of the development is meant to be San Jose, Oakland, San Francisco. And really from us, as although we're kind of polycentric as a region, San Francisco is a major city and a major focal point for jobs, for culture, for tourism, for education. There's really 2 main corridors that are the biggest concern. There's the Trans-Bay corridor, which connects us here at the end of the peninsula with the rest of the East Bay. And then there's the Peninsula corridor, which connects from San Jose to San Francisco. So the good news is that there's some efforts that are underway to look both at the Trans-Bay crossing. Our regional transportation planning agency is undertaking what they're calling a core capacity study, because right now this bridge, the Bay Bridge, is at capacity, and the BART train, which goes underneath the bay, is also at capacity. And then, as you heard from Jim, coming up the corridor, the main transit facility, which is CalTrain, is at capacity, as are the freeways, the 101 and the 280 that he talked about. So we're at a point of constraint, and so that's why looking at how we can enhance capacity through means, as Rod pointed out, that are not going to contribute to the further degradation of our environment and that are going to be efficient and clean and sustainable, are really important to us in San Francisco, because if you look at where these two things meet, it's right in that same downtown area where all the growth is. So we really need to figure this out. We have been not just planning at the regional level, but at the local level. So back probably nearly 10 years ago, planning for this part of the city started in earnest. It resulted in a number of plans around the area, but particularly the Transit Center District Plan. And this was the plan anticipating the future northern terminus of California high-speed rail, as well as the northern terminus of CalTrain, recognizing that, as Rod said, it's not just putting a train station out in the middle of a cow pasture. We're talking about bringing it into the core of a city where there will be a lot of density to support it, and so that minimizes the need even for last mile connections for the folks there, but really helps kind of build the case for why, or it helps really with the viability of the system. It's putting the infrastructure where the jobs and the housing growth is going to be. And that image down there, I don't know how well you can see it, but there's kind of some shadowy pictures of a skyline that is essentially south of the current downtown development of San Francisco. I think this image was from 2009. So at the time, this plan was had just been released as a draft, and at the time you might have said, well, I don't know, is it really going to happen? Well, a lot of these have already happened or are under construction. So again, this isn't just planning on a piece of paper. This is, in a lot of places, this is steel in the ground. And really at the center of this is the Transbay Terminal. This is what it was. It was built, I think, in the 1930s. At the time, this was a photo or rendering from when it opened. It kind of looks all nice and clean. There were streetcars. It connected the San Francisco streetcar network with the East Bay streetcar network. It used to be streetcars that actually ran across the Bay Bridge. Very sadly, most of those rail lines, all of them on the bridge and most of them in the city, were torn up, and you probably all know the story of that. But what started out as maybe kind of a nice looking facility fitting for its time really degraded over time. The streetcars went away, a lot of riders went away. It became essentially a derelict bus yard in the middle of our city, a big concrete behemoth. So that's where we were as more and more people were shifting to cars. But now we're moving in a different direction. Ben made reference to the Transbay Transit Center, which is under construction now. It's all the steel is complete, so the whole skeleton of what you see is complete. Down at the bottom of the image, you can see the CalTrain and high-speed rail tracks, and up above are where the regional and city buses will go. So a truly multimodal transportation hub that will connect high-speed rail, CalTrain, a block away is BART, and the regional buses, which will have a direct path from the terminal onto the Bay Bridge to add to that Transbay capacity that I talked about. So we're doing the planning in advance. We're building the station in advance, just waiting for Ben and Jim to get their trains to us. And I'll talk about there's a bit of a path to get their trains to us. And like I said, this isn't just fanciful development. If you do, as Ben suggested, go just walk around that area, you'll see that just incredible construction that's happening, the building construction. So I think Gillian's going to talk a little bit more about this, but right now the CalTrain terminus is here. The Transbay Center is there. So the last mile, in this case of rail connection, is something that we're working on, but critically important that we get, and as Jim said, makes a lot more viable both CalTrain and high-speed rail if they can get right into the center of San Francisco. Jim already talked about this, and I even stole a couple of graphics from him, so I won't talk more about it. What I would say, just reinforcing what both Ben and Jim said, is high-speed rail enables CalTrain electrification. CalTrain electrification essentially enables high-speed rail, so the two of them are co-enabling each other, and they're both critically important to San Francisco because a lot of the people who work and live in between San Francisco, or who work in between San Francisco and San Jose, are living in San Francisco, and more of them want to live in San Francisco. They need a way to get down to the peninsula. They need a way to get to San Jose. We're a little bit, somewhat tangential, but I think the future not only will provide for travel on the corridor, but to be able to extend that northern terminus of high-speed rail, not on the other side of the bay, but on this side of the bay where the density is through San Francisco into Oakland and then up to Sacramento, would provide tremendous linkage for folks in the East Bay to the peninsula. Again, a lot of the job growth is in the peninsula. A lot of this is housing on the East Bay. So additional Trans-Bay capacity is something that we've started to look at. Not just more capacity for BART crossing the bay, but also for standard rail that would connect the Capitol Corridor, which runs up here, with the CalTrain corridor that runs down there, and ultimately potentially high-speed rail coming through San Francisco up to Sacramento. And then just kind of the last point, and there was some reference to if we didn't do high-speed rail, we'd have to build more runways. There's a converse to that, in that if we do build high-speed rail, not only, as Jim said, do we potentially free up some capacity on CalTrain, we free up a lot of capacity at SFO. It's about 20% of the SFO travel is doing those short trips, which, as Rod said, are some of the least efficient environmentally and otherwise, certainly time efficient. So freeing up that space, because it'll be a much better and easier and more pleasant experience to get from between San Francisco and LA on high-speed rail than it is trying to get out to the airports, frees up that space at the airport for other domestic and international travel, which is good for our local, regional, state, and national economy. So kind of a big win there for the airports. So to wrap things up, so I don't overstay my time here, we really need, it from San Francisco's perspective, and the reason, I don't know why the folks down south aren't embracing it, but up here, we absolutely see this as essential to our growth as a city and a region, today's growth, as well as all the growth that we see coming from the demographers' projections. And we really see high-speed rail as an enabler. If it weren't for the California High-Speed Rail Project, they're funding some of our last-mile connection into connecting with high-speed rail, but certainly they're making CalTrain electrification possible. I think they're making more viable the case for a much-needed crossing across the bay, a Trans-Bay crossing. It also frees the capacity at the airports, as I say. So we're happy to be working in partnership with high-speed rail, with CalTrain, with the rest of the region, and feeding into the state's rail plan to do everything that we can to not just see this come to reality, but to try to get it to reality sooner. So I'll end there. Happy to take any questions. Yes, sir.
The picture that you showed of the alternative routes to the downtown station, the tunnel alternatives, and does that have a turnback capacity like the current station?
So Gillian is going to, I think, show you a little bit of that. So we're studying a number of things, including primarily the alignment to get to the Trans-Bay, but also some turnaround capacity. Because right now, like 4th and King, the Trans-Bay Transit Center is a dead end. So trains go in and then they kind of back out. So we're looking at different alignments. We're looking at potential disposition of the current rail yard, which is now right on the edge of our downtown, but also looking about where trains could either turn around or even continue east across the bay. So it's part of a study that we're undertaking and engaged with all the different parties at play here, such as high-speed rail.
Maybe Gillian will touch on it, but how about overnight storage and cleaning of the trains?
Yeah, so part of what we're looking at is where that would happen. CalTrain has already said that they can operate with a smaller footprint right here. So we're looking at other areas in the city further down along the right-of-way that would be adequate to support the O&M needs of the railway. Okay, thanks.